little bit closer to MCAT than Austin is, but also remember it very, very well.
All right. I guess we'll just go back and forth, Lois. Is that okay?
Good.
Awesome. So everyone's heard of the MCAT, probably, who's thinking about going into med school. It's a big, bad, scary test. And it is very scary. It's one of these first real big formal exams that you're going to be facing throughout your career as a physician. And it really assesses everything that comes into becoming a medical student and a doctor. It's problem solving, it's critical thinking. It's not only rote memorization of things, but it's application of those. And because of that, med schools across US, Canada, they use it as a strong benchmark to see who they want to admit into their medical school, which is why it's all important.
So the MCAT is a long exam. It's structured into 4 sections, 230 questions total for about 7.5 hours. It's a multiple choice exam, so you're going to have more than one answer to pick from. But the nice portion of it, despite the length of time, is that some of the questions in that exam are actually experimental questions. So if you feel like, oh, I missed an entire section, or this was just like unusually tricky, more often than not, it's because it's an experimental section that's not going to be impacting your score. Unfortunately, however, you won't know which portions are experimental, so you always want to just do your best in every single section.
Do this control down. Yeah, so 4 sections, they're always the same in terms of those sections. And from what I remember, they always go in the same order. They kind of start out with a heavy hitter, and that's Chem Phys, chemical and physical foundations. This is where you get into your OChem, your physics, a little bit of biochem and biology sprinkled in there. You got 60 questions, hour and a half, very kind of standard level there. But importantly, when you approach these sections, you're going to have questions that relate all back to a passage that you had to dissect, as well as what they call discrete questions, which are those that are kind of encapsulated in their own, like a figure or specific, like, let's just say, what bond forms with this reaction, something like that. And so this is where you're really doing the heavy duty science in the Chem Phys section. And of course, there's science in others, but this was the one that was actually the hardest for me, just because it covered so much of such difficult topics.
The next section is the CARS section, and this can be a bit difficult for those who either have English as a second language or just were not big fans of English and reading in school. It focuses on reading comprehension and analytical reasoning, and you're thinking, instead of science, you're thinking about like humanities and the social sciences. It's similar, it's 90 minutes and has 53 questions. There's no scientific portions here. It's just about ethics, philosophy, and social studies. But really, I think it's just reading comprehension. Most of the answers, all the answers are in the text. It's just how do I find them?
You have to switch gears again back to section 3, kind of going back to those sciences. This time it's more about the living organism side of things. Whereas like the first section is about all those reactions that are underpinning how we live and how organisms live. This is now more about the biology and biochemistry of that. And you can see there's not physics listed in this, but there's a lot of repeat of the other topics. And if you wanted to get really granular with it, you can look up the AMC content outline. They put like percentages to how much of each subject is there. But as you can see, you really have to know your biology, your OChem, even your physics and your biochem, all of that, because it gets tested at different portions throughout all these sections. In this one, you have another 60 questions. So you already have 120 of those 200 and some questions relating to these subjects. And again, back to that passage-based as well as the discrete questions.
And then you have what we call psych-soc and biological foundations. This is a lot of psychology, sociology, human behaviors and perceptions. It also integrates a little bit of biology, but again, it has to do with psychology and sociology and sociocultural factors. Similarly, it's about 60 questions and 95 minutes, and you have that same mix, again, of passage-based questions. So you read a passage, you answer about 4 or 5 questions associated with that passage, or you'll have discrete questions where it's just one question stem and you answer that question.
Andrea, did you want to talk about this? Okay.
Absolutely. I just want to do a quick check-in with our audience to see if we have any questions thus far. Give me one moment. I don't see any questions thus far, so I'll let you two continue. But again, we encourage you to use the chat. This is really your time to sit down with two experts in the field and get all those questions answered that you might otherwise not been able to answer. So definitely take advantage of it.
Awesome. Okay. Now, getting to the anxiety-provoking question is, how do you approach the MCAT? With it being this huge test, both in terms of content, length, difficulty, the most important thing is to have a plan and stick to it. And not only that, it has to be a plan that's structured to you. If you get a plan that's kind of rote from the internet, that's a good start, but only you know your weaknesses, your strengths. For example, I had a minor in psychology, and so I knew a lot of those concepts, and I could focus my efforts on the OChem and the biochem, but it may be different for other people. And this is where people with experience come in to help, and you begin to assess your own weaknesses. That should be a part of any study plan as well. And we'll kind of get into the hows and whys and buts, but it's really, really, really important that you don't just dive into the content. You create a plan first so that you don't freak out about how much you have to cover, because you will have that plan in front of you.
Okay, so one of the big things for setting that plan, determining how much time you need to use, or if you need to supplement with other materials, is to know what goal MCAT score that you're trying to achieve. Some people just sort of practice and take the test, but without really having a goal in mind. But the reason that you want to have a goal in mind is because, one, you would know if you need to do more work, put in more effort, get more support if you need to. But then it also lets you know, what schools am I interested in applying to, and how can I work towards that? That's the efficacy of having an MCAT score goal. Then, you have all these goals now, which schools you want to go to, which score you want, which sections in the test you need to work on. Break those down into long-term goals and short-term goals, right? If I need to improve my psych-soc section, the short-term goal, right, would be that, maybe I'll spend more time, more hours in this given study block devoted to that section. And the thing too is that you want to make it a SMART goal, and SMART goals are defined by being very specific. So if I was making a goal again, it would be, I want to improve my psych-soc score by 3 points. That's very specific, measurable, 3 points, achievable because I can do work, right, and practice and study, and then take a test or in that section and see if my score improves. Relevant to the entire MCAT score, to the goal that you're trying to achieve, and time bound. So within a specific time frame, I want to improve my psych-soc score by 3 points in the next week. That's something very achievable.
Yeah. I think this next slide is a perfect jump off of that, kind of using that SMART framework and then thinking about those specifics that we've kind of already touched on. This assessment of knowledge, being vulnerable with yourself at what you're good at and what you're not. And the reason you're becoming a doctor is to continue to get good at something that you may never be totally perfect at. And so this is a really important step, is trying to figure out where you are weakest so you can allocate the most of that study time towards that goal. And another thing that I mentioned just offhand is that content outline. Different subjects have different weights on the test. They're broken down by percentages, 15, 20, 40, whatever it may be. And that should be an important component of your study plan, as well as to figure out how much is high yield, how much can I say oh, it's only 2% of the test, and you want to allocate more time somewhere else. And then layering on your comfort level with that. Again, using your background. You can technically, I believe, take the MCAT exam as soon as that summer after your sophomore year of college. Most people probably don't and shouldn't do that, but someone who may be more advanced in their career, like maybe taking their senior year because they're going to do a gap year, will have a lot more background and ability to understand concepts than someone who's earlier on, who maybe is in biochem at the same time they are trying to study for MCAT biochem. So very, very important to personalize that.
Oh, this is a big one, is creating a study schedule with time allocation. I've seen different people approach it different ways. Someone says, oh, I'm studying for 40 hours a week, 60 hours a week. But then when you really break it down, sometimes they spend a lot of time actually just either scrolling the web or going on Reddit or Student Doctor Network and kind of panicking and not actually reading the book. And that's how it can go to 40 hours a week. I actually like to bring it even more narrow and say, in a day's time, how many hours am I allocating to which sections, if I'm going to do it by sections, or how many hours am I allocating to taking a test and reviewing it. And the reason I do that is because then you can really see like what times of the day am I an efficient studier, and what times of the day do I find myself more inclined to be on my phone or to be watching Netflix or something, or what times of the day am I mentally tired and unable to study. So if you're going more granular by the day, by the hour, you can also organize your schedule to your own natural behavior so that you're making the most of the time that you have in a given 24-hour period. And then I would zoom that out and make a weekly schedule. So if I know I'm efficient at these times of the day, I total it to maybe 8 hours a day of studying. And I plan a week and what that would look like for me. And at the end of the week, you've been doing so much work for the last 5-6 days. There should be a day where you're reviewing things to reinforce, or maybe sometimes you're reviewing things every single day to make sure that you're reinforcing what you've just learned. I know that some students, there's just so much content to learn that they spend a lot of time just going through content, but as the days go on, the things that they learned on Monday, they forgot by Friday. So it's really important for you to allocate some time for review so that your time learning on Monday is not wasted by Friday. And I would do the same thing, and I zoom out for taking practice tests. Find a time to review other content that you learned and see how it's impacting your MCAT score.
That was perfect. And you know, we were talking about all these strategies, but another part of those SMART goals is measurability. How do you monitor these study sessions? How do you adjust in case things go off track or go better than expected? And so there's plenty of resources out there. You know, everyone on the web is saying this study method is better than the other. You can track this way. Huberman has his own ideas, but it's important to find something, whether it's a paper journal or the most advanced app out there, to monitor your daily achievements. And that's not only to keep you on track, but it's to keep you motivated, to show that you're accomplishing something, even though you feel like when you're in the weak points that you don't know anything. It's to remind yourself that you're making progress and to keep pushing yourself forward. And in addition to that, it shows where you may be lacking and where you can focus your efforts and adjust your plan. And no plan at the beginning will ever be the same by the end. And it's super important to, of course, stick to your guns, so to speak, but also be willing to adjust that plan if you find something that's maybe you haven't looked at a certain topic and you have a glaring area you need to improve. And it is very difficult to focus on the areas that you're most challenged in, but it's often pays off the most when you do so. And of course, it's important to reinforce your strengths and review that. But really, it's about identifying, fixing, moving on, and just building slowly and slowly. And that's where monitoring and adjustments are a core component of that strong study plan to make it nimble and adaptive to you.
And then there's the big thing with consistency and motivation. I struggle with this as well. I know many students do. You want to set yourself up in a way where what you're doing, you will not burn out in a short amount of time. And that's where, again, making those weekly, daily, hourly plans that adapt to your own normal body's rhythm and the joys and you know, the way that you operate, right? If you were only going, you know, you wake up in the morning and you only study and you don't have lunch and you don't see the sun and you don't talk to anybody, by the end of that week, or probably the end of the next week, you'll be very, very, you know, demotivated and sad. So you want to just set your schedule up in a way that it's easy for you to be consistent. If you know that you are not going to be, you know, studying new content in the evenings because you're already tired, don't make your schedule that way. So find a way that you can be consistent, but also find a way to be disciplined. Sometimes you find that what I'm doing is not getting me the progress that I want in the span of time. And although you're comfortable, you might have to be a little bit more uncomfortable and disciplined. So maybe you have to wake up a little bit earlier, or maybe you do have to review all this really hard, sometimes ugly content that you don't want to look at. But discipline is key to seeing progress when you're studying for the MCAT. And then when you do see that progress, celebrate it. Give yourself a day off, go watch a movie, go spend time with friends. Because when you are able to be joyful and human and operate and have happiness in your life, it's a little bit easier to come back to that textbook the next day and start all over again. So finding a way to be consistent, but also continue to be motivated is important.
Yeah. Now we're kind of switching gears again, and this is going from more that philosophy studying and how do you approach this big goal of yours, which methods do you use, to which resources do you use. There's a ton out there now, more than was there 6 years ago for me. And there is a very big pitfall that happens, whether it's the MCAT, the STEP exams, or anything in between, to over-resource yourself. So as important as it is to develop a study plan with times, strategies, commitments, it's also important to develop an understanding of the overview of the resources you have at your disposal. And for that reason, we're going to go into courses, practice exams, tutoring of all levels, and all the study materials that everyone talks about.
Okay, so let's talk about them. So the first are online courses. So online courses are nice because they take a little bit of that required self-discipline and sort of organizing secretarial work out of the cards for you, because the course is already formatted that for you. It also does it in a way where you can be flexible. So if you're working or doing something else at the same time, the online courses can be self-paced, or you can go in a certain way where you can still cover the content, but in a way that's more adaptable to you and your schedule. And they're really nice because they also include what we call interactive features, such as quizzing and forums. The quizzes are nice because you can, instead of you having to quiz yourself and say, do I understand this content? They probably have already designed a quiz that focuses on the key content that you should have known, or you should now know, now that you've finished this section of our online course. And so you can really tell, like, am I on track to be successful? And the forums are nice because you probably have the same questions that students last year or the year before have, or you're just maybe confused about a certain section or something. The forums are nice because you have a space to have those discussions with fellow students, and they can answer questions for you, or you can see that, I had this train of thought and other people had it last year, and this is how they navigated it. The next thing are practice exams, which I find to be the holy grail of, success and tracking your success for any type of major exam. Practice exams are really helpful because not only do they let you go through the types of content you're going to get quizzed about, but they let you simulate the sitting down for 7.5 hours. That is not something that you come out of the womb knowing how to do. I know personally, I was antsy by hour 5 to get out. So when I was reviewing my tests, I would be like, the last couple hours of that exam were pretty bad because I was not focused and I was ready to just get out of there. When you take practice exams and you sit down for 7.5 hours multiple times in a row for a couple months, you get good at it. So that's one of the benefits of practice exams outside of just reviewing the exam material. And then again, it's also helpful because it lets you see which areas are your strengths and which areas are your weaknesses. And then you can tailor and adapt your study plan and study schedule to close those gaps.
So speaking of tailoring, you also have the opportunity to engage in private tutoring and the study materials associated with that. In terms of what this can do for you, it's about personalization. It's about having someone who keeps you accountable, who knows your strengths and weaknesses. It prevents that second guessing that can often happen. Are you doing the right thing? Are you covering enough ground? And usually, almost always, those people have been in similar shoes where they themselves have brought themselves through this studying plan. They know the pitfalls, they understand where you may get hung up, and they see you holistically as a person as well. It's a layer on top of those static course materials so that you actually get that live feedback, that motivation, that areas for improvement. And it makes it very, very focused every time you meet with this person that you're accomplishing a specific SMART goal. And of course, you're layering in the materials that we've already talked about, the review books, online resources, textbooks, whatever may be involved there. But it's all personalized according to your learning plans the way you learn the best. And for that reason, oftentimes gets great scores out of it.
And I guess the best way to do it is really to combine everything. So most people can combine online resources with the practice exams, with private tutoring and study materials to create a well-rounded study environment for your success, because it's just true that you really can't get everything that you need from one source. Even if you were to buy all of a particular set of textbooks and read through them, you still have not had the practice of sitting down for 7.5 hours and taking a practice exam. So even if you're going to combine the textbooks with the practice exams, you'd have to bring those two things together. And sometimes you need an external person to really guide you through the complexities and uncertainty of practicing for this exam. So we always say that it's an integrated approach that covers all aspects of MCAT preparation, including the content, including external guidance, including reinforcement, including practicing, that really, really boosts the student's overall performance.
Okay. Final section, how do you stick with it this whole time? How do you stay motivated? How do you stay focused? How do those go hand in hand? Yes, you can have all the content in your brain, but if you can't make it to the finish line, you can't make that performance happen. And so in addition to the strategies for covering all the content, in addition to the strategies for deciding what resources to use, you should also have strategies for how to stay motivated and focused.
And setting realistic goals, right? So you want them to be SMART goals, very specific, what you want to achieve and how much time do I have? Can I really achieve that? And understanding that maybe, I may not master this topic, but I may know enough to get me the score that I need in this particular section. So always being very realistic and specific about the goals that you're trying to set and what that means for the overall MCAT goal. And breaking down large goals into smaller ones, as we said, instead of just saying, I want this particular score and just like running towards it, think about what sections you can elevate, what sections you can gain more points in, and how much time do I have, and how much of the high yield content can I cover? And the reason you want to really think about it this way is because then it makes all these large, like, I want to get this score, makes it more manageable, makes it more feasible when you're more specific and granular in that nature. And then celebrate your milestones. If you're gaining these points, if you're learning new content that was really confusing for you before, or you're answering questions that you remember last week, this type of question was just really hard for me to understand, and now I can conceptualize it. Really celebrate that and find ways to reward yourself. That way you're not just always sitting and staring at that book or at that exam, but like going out, being with friends, having ice cream, or just relaxing, because those things are going to help you continue to progress.
Yeah, that was a perfect transition to the inevitable feeling of stress that you're going to encounter. It's a stressful exam. It's designed to be that way. Medical school is stressful. The step exams are stressful. Residency is stressful. But it's all for the right reasons. And it's really important that you learn stress management while you're studying for this test so that you can incorporate it later on as things get even busier. So whatever techniques that you have up your sleeve, whether it's meditation, non-sleep deep rest, whether it's going out with friends or staying in and just watching a movie or doing nothing at all or exercising, it's really, really important to incorporate those into the foundation of your studying, because that's what's going to allow you to finish the marathon of studying and finish the marathon of the test on test day. If you know a little about exercise, it's about, of course, doing as much as possible to keep inching forward. But there's going to be times where you're hurting, and for that reason, you should rest before you keep going. Otherwise, you're going to run into an injury that may take you completely off course. And same goes academically. Your brain can only take so much, but you can always work it out a little bit more to get better. And you need these checkpoints of managing stress with the techniques that work best for you and not those that work best for others or celebrities or whatever they may be, and just continuing to use those throughout the study period and beyond.
Okay, so then how do you prevent burnout? One is to recognize the signs. Think about, when you are at your lowest, what did that feel like? And if you're feeling like you are recreating that or starting to feel similar, like fatigue, lack of motivation, you're able to recognize it. And then addressing early signs can also help you just prevent that spiral. Something that really helps is when I get feedback from my friends or my peers or my family members. They're saying, Lois, you look a little bit, tired or stressed. That's a key for me that I might actually be going down that burnout route. And then 2, practice self-care. And not just when you are starting to notice that you might be tired or burning out, but if you do it consistently, the way that you're studying consistently, you're less likely, right, to get into the hurdle of burnout. Make sure you get enough sleep. Make sure you're exercising. Make sure that you're eating well. I know a lot of students, when they start really studying, the eating goes out the window, and then the exercise goes out the window. So make sure that you organize your schedule and your life so that you're able to continue doing those things. Because these things help you maintain your energy and your focus, and you can really think clearly whenever you are, at your best. And then balance your schedule, incorporate regular breaks and leisure activities, go out and see the sun, hang out with your friends, and don't overload your schedule. I know a lot of us see all the things we have to learn and say, I'm going to do all of this today. Be realistic for 2 reasons. 1, so that you can actually get things done on that day and you don't feel bad. Having a list or a schedule that always rolls over to the next day can be mentally tiring. So you want to set goals that are achievable, because that makes you feel good and it helps you get ready for the next day.
Yeah. And speaking of balance, studying is hard, but you can make it enjoyable too. One of the ways to do that is to keep your brain engaged by kind of switching back and forth between what you do. Not so much that you're over-resourcing and spreading yourself too thin, but it's important to give a little bit of variety. Of course, you want to accomplish your goals, but how you do that is totally up to you. So whether you like watching videos as a way to drink coffee in the morning and then switch to more of that hardcore content when everything sets in, or something of the other, it's important to personalize that part as well. And finally, don't forget to reward yourself, not just on test day or after test day, but also when you complete a practice exam, when you finally learn that physics concept that had been escaping you for so long. Give yourself the reward that you deserve and use that dopamine modulating that Huberman talks about. Again, I'm a big fan of Huberman podcast, so sorry about that, but use that to keep you moving along, and realize that even making progress in your study plan before test day is as much of an achievement as getting to that test day in and of itself, because this is a really, really hard road. Not many people take it, but it also provides the foundational skills necessary to become a great doctor.
And this is where I pop in. So far, I think we've had some really fantastic conversations. So off the bat, I want to thank you both for that. I'd love to use a little bit more time and get to some of the Q&As. So a question that we received is about the January MCAT in itself, because that's sort of the overarching theme of today's conversation. And is the January MCAT actually more difficult in terms of, taking it in January versus taking it at another time?
That's a good question. I've never heard of them any being harder than another. And I think the one way to think about it is unless I guess some students will be retaking the test and maybe they themselves can make that comparison, but it's never been a prevailing thought in any circles that I've been in that January is a harder test than any other test.
Yeah. I think in that way, I think this is bouncing off of the fact that, of course, things are curved. Like, you're being graded with the people who take the test on the day you take it, because all the forms are kind of random and whatnot. And that's the same for the step exams, whatever else you'll be facing later on. I don't think I've heard of that before. And I can tell you from my friends who took it every month of the year, it was always hard. And so I really would just focus on the fact that it's going to be difficult. And it's not about strategizing and biohacking at this level. It's really about engaging in the marathon that everyone has to accomplish to get a good score.
So let's say somebody is taking it in January, then when is the best time to really get started? What do you each of you recommend?
What are we in right now? We're in September.
September.
September. I mean, I think it depends. I think some school is also starting. So I would say that if you are starting school or you're an undergrad or in any like post-bac program or something, I would focus maybe this first month on really adjusting to whatever environment that you're in. That way you're that way your academics don't suffer just because you're trying to take the MCAT. If you have been if you take this month off and you have 3 months before the exam, I think that you're good to really find a schedule that works for you and take your time and use those 3 months to really boost your score, take a baseline and do what you need to do. But I feel like 3 months is good. Some people have done it even in shorter times, depending on what your baseline is, really.
Yeah. And I think that also maps, again, if you're in school, you know your class schedule. Are you going to have biochem and OChem and physics and all of this at once? Because your grades are also important. GPA is also important. So if you're facing a difficult semester or a difficult couple of quarters, you may want to start earlier so that you can study a little less every day, but still reach that same goal. Whereas maybe you are in the middle of a gap year or doing something where you have maybe a more regular 40-hour work week or whatever it may be. Then you can have that latitude to really go hard in sprints. But it's still important that you cover the topics that you were the weakest in, regardless of whatever time frame that is. I'd say it's also important to know yourself. If you're going to be anxious about it, then start looking at it. But don't beat yourself up if you can't start today, because like we all just mentioned, if you're starting school, you have to figure that out first. You have to still live life, do school, do a job while still preparing for this big exam.
Incredibly well said to the both of you. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but what I do want to ask each of you is there anything you'd like to add to the conversation, anything we may not have covered, whether that's, a piece of advice regarding the med school application process or even the MCAT?
I think something that Austin's has been mentioning that I think is really valuable is having gone through the course. So if you're taking biochemistry or taking physics, I think it's helpful because you have an instructor or peers or TAs to really guide you through it. I think some students, this might be their first time learning straight from a textbook and not by tutoring or not by lecturing. So if you have the opportunity to go through the content in class, and maybe you buy the MCAT associated review books and you kind of also just follow along or go through the pages and make sure that, yeah, we covered this. Yeah, we covered this. It's really helpful because then if you have any questions that come up from either studying for the MCAT or studying in class, you have a person already, right, that's part of your academic schedule that you can go and ask. So that's an undervalued thing. I think some students are like, well, I'll just study for it later. But if you can do it while you're in school, I think it's really beneficial.
Yeah. And speaking of that as well, physics, I know most places you can take it calculus-based or algebra-based. MCAT is algebra-based. You should be strategic about that. And of course, if you're an engineer, mathematics major, you probably don't have a choice to fulfill those requirements while also doing this. But I personally, even though I did calculus in high school and really love math, I went the algebra route because I knew the MCAT was low. So it's important to plan your courses according to when you might think that you take the MCAT as well. And of course that can change. It doesn't have to be perfect, but that's really important. And on the flip side of that coin, do not sleep on the car section. Just because it's about reading doesn't mean that you already have the skills just because you can read. It's really about critical analysis and practicing those passages and what they're looking for. The answer is often there, but you have to know how to look for it.
Awesome. Thank you both. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I think this is a really great place to end tonight's webinar. I want to thank you both for being here with us tonight, and thank you to our audience. Of course, this webinar was rescheduled, so we appreciate everyone showing up. If you have any kind of questions, comments, concerns, or you'd love to be invited to our next webinars, please don't hesitate to drop us a note, whether that be through a website or each of you received an email. So feel free to respond and we'll be able to get in touch. With that being said, I hope everyone has a wonderful night and we'll see you on the next webinar.